I have a confession to make. Unlike most people, I adore Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin. I'm fully aware that this is an unpopular opinion considering how easy it is to hate Batman and Robin, as it's nowhere close to the stereotypical Batman movie. Now, despite being a fan of Batman and Robin, I never knew that I had a tie-in game, nor have I ever played this tie-in game until this video. After finally playing Batman and Robin for the PS1, I can easily say that this game is up there as one of the worst superhero games ever made. This Batman and Robin PS1 game might just be one of the most clunky, disastrous, and obnoxious superhero games I've ever played. While I don't want to sound too harsh, as the game was released in 1998 and was developed by a studio named Probe Entertainment, which shut down many years ago, playing this Batman and Robin game was such a confusing experience. For every moment I found myself legitimately enjoying the game, there was a moment that immediately reminded me of just how archaic and poorly designed this game is. For example, controlling Batman, Batgirl, or Robin feels absolutely terrible. The way you have to stop, turn, and pivot the character you're using to simply move around in this game is horrendous, but controlling the Batmobile or Bat motorcycles while traversing Gotham is shockingly fun, even if they get stuck on a sidewalk far too many times. Batman and Robin has a heavy focus on being a detective game, as it wants you to find a bunch of clues and solve a bunch of puzzles, so Batman can figure out what Mr. Freeze's plans are and figure out the appropriate way to become strong enough to take down Mr. Freeze and his henchmen. However, going from wandering in a building aimlessly looking for clues and solving random puzzles to having to suddenly fight Freeze's henchmen, who periodically will appear out of nowhere, is such a chore. Unlike Batman Dark Tomorrow, another terrible game I've discussed on this channel, Batman and Robin vaguely tells you what you're supposed to be doing in the game, although that too comes with an asterisk because the game's clear focus was getting the player to actively spend time exploring its open world Gotham City rather than being a typical video game that pushes a player from one mission to another, and that begins to make Batman and Robin feel repetitive and kind of boring. It's a shame because Gotham is the selling point of Batman and Robin for the PS1. It's by far the biggest strength of this game and probably the only reason why you should check this game out if you're morbidly curious. Unlike Batman Dark Tomorrow on the GameCube, can you tell that I genuinely hate that game? Batman and Robin has this open world Gotham City that shockingly feels alive for a PS1 game. For example, one of the first things that happen in Batman and Robin after you finally figure out how to leave the Batcave is the game pointing out to you that a random civilian is getting mugged right outside of Wayne Manor and they should probably stop the mugging while it's happening. Well, no, it doesn't force you to stop the mugging from happening. I was actually stunned to see the game giving that sort of instance or mini events so early on in the game. Although, that may be because I had rock bottom expectations before playing this game, I was still pleasantly surprised to see such an amazingly and painfully accurate depiction of Gotham. However, that's not what makes this game's Gotham shine. What makes this game's Gotham shine is the amount of effort and dedication that was put into making sure that Gotham was filled to the brim with activity. There's never a moment that makes you feel like you're aimlessly driving around this vacant city that could have been better. There are thugs on motorcycles constantly chasing you and trying to ram into the Batmobile. Mr. Freeze has henchmen that are in ice cream trucks chasing after you as well. And on top of that, there are even cars that look like mini tanks shooting ice beams at you too. There's a constant ridiculous amount of chaos in Gotham that makes driving around worth your time, plus it feels like that's how it's supposed to be thanks to this game following Batman 89's dark, gritty, and gothic design of Gotham instead of Schumacher's visually vibrant, over-the-top aesthetic in the Batman and Robin movie. Unfortunately though, this is probably the only positive thing I can say about this game. As someone who grew up consistently playing Crash Bandicoot on the PS1, fun fact by the way, Crash Bandicoot was my favorite game of all time until Kingdom Hearts 2 came out, which is now my favorite game of all time for those who care. I can easily say that the controls for Batman, Robin, and Batgirl might flat out be the most clunky controls I've ever dealt with in a video game. The fact that this game expects the player to have fun as they're forced to stop moving, pivot their character, and then turn the angle of their character to simply walk forward for the entirety of this game is straight up laughable, and not for a good reason. The controls are infuriating and they're hard to ignore because not only is this problem highlighted by the amount of small corridors this game expects you to explore, but because it feels like you have to fight against every modern instinct you have to even attempt to play Batman and Robin today. Taking a left turn in a small hallway is an absolute chore. Fighting any of Freeze's henchmen is far more confusing than it should be, since it's hard to gauge the space between you and his henchmen in these small hallways. And what's worse is it consistently brings any pace you build in the game to an absolute halt. Every single time you're making too much progress or you're beginning to explore a building at a pretty good pace, you end up finding yourself back in yet another random tiny hallway, or a ridiculous puzzle that takes place in multiple hallways of a building. Since the controls are so awful and clunky, even Batman and Robin's camera is incredibly distracting because it too is struggling to keep up with how the game's controls are constantly forcing the player to change the angle or perspective of Batman, Robin, or Batgirl before you push forward. It is beyond annoying. For a game that pushes the player to explore as much as possible and as much as you need to, it's an absolute struggle to explore anywhere or anything in Batman and Robin. The combination of these terrible controls and this intolerable camera that's struggling to deal with the same nonsense as the player makes this game an absolute disaster to play, and that's not even the worst part of this game. What most people may not know is that just like the Batman Arkham trilogy, Batman and Robin has a heavy focus on Batman being a detective. Rather than making Batman a one-dimensional beat-em-up character, Batman and Robin attempted to be ahead of its time by showing the duality of Batman. The developers behind this game very clearly wanted to make you feel like a detective and a superhero, which are two distinctive feelings and sides of Batman that are only separated by pressing a trigger. By pressing one of the triggers on your controller, the game allows you to switch between detective mode and combat mode. When detective mode is on, you're able to open doors, interact with buttons, and jump around. When combat mode is on, you're able to kick and punch your way through Mr. Freeze's henchmen. However, while this was a good design concept, what made it terrible instead is the simple fact that you could only do those respective things in their respective mode. You can't open a door while in combat mode, and you can't kick or punch anyone when you're in detective mode. Although it only takes the press of a trigger to switch between the two, having to constantly switch makes the game feel so unintuitive. Throughout my attempted playthrough of Batman and Robin, there were so many times where I found myself getting jumped by Freeze's henchmen and not being able to deal with them because I forgot that I was in detective mode instead of being in combat mode. There were also multiple times where I was trying to open a door or jump from one platform to another, but I couldn't because I forgot that I was in combat mode. What would have worked in the game's favor was if it had a simple mission structure where you're told to go to a specific building, you go search for clues, you find the clues, and the payoff is a boss fight at the end of the mission. That way your only focus is using combat mode to defeat the boss fight, and you're not constantly dealing with the annoyance of forgetting that you're in combat mode when you need to be in detective mode as you're searching for clues, or vice versa. While I'm fully aware that it sounds like I'm complaining about something so unimportant, it's not just this that feels unintuitive, it's the whole game that ultimately feels that way. When you combine clunky controls that make it ridiculously hard to move around, a camera that's struggling to turn smoothly as it fails to keep up with the obnoxiously clunky controls, and having to constantly remember that you need to switch between two modes just for you to be able to do basic things around Gotham, there is this instantaneous realization that this game is just one massive recipe for disaster. If all of these other flaws weren't bad enough, it also doesn't help that the one genuinely cool and creative idea this game has makes it honestly not worth playing in this day and age because of how poorly executed it is. Having players slowly pick up a nearly invisible paper trail of clues that are spread throughout Gotham's buildings and dropped by Gotham's thugs or Freeze's henchmen to slowly put together what Freeze's plans are so you can figure out what you're supposed to do, where you're supposed to go, and how you can inevitably stop Mr. Freeze isn't fun at all. This creative idea was done to encourage the player to enjoy and explore the openness of Gotham, which is the only real positive in this game, as I mentioned earlier in the video. But you can only revisit the streets of Gotham to find these clues to figure out this nearly invisible paper trail so many times before you begin to ask yourself, why am I even playing this game? An alternative take on Batman and Robin's concept that would have made this game better is formulating a detective-centric game that barely has any combat at first, while Batman, Robin, and Batgirl go from building to building exploring so they can find clues and talk to NPCs as they attempt to solve the ongoing mystery, even if there's no voice-acted dialogue. Combat could be introduced as the game progresses, however, the combat should be introduced in combat-only segments to not interfere with the detective aspect of the game. As the player begins to get closer to the final act of the game, by that point in time, the player would have already put multiple clues together and pieced together Freeze's paper trail, just like this game wanted the player to do. Along with that, the player would have been forced, or at least pointed, to the direction of visiting iconic places that are relevant to the Batman and Robin movie, such as Mr. Freeze's lair, Botanical Gardens, Wayne Manor, and other minor locations as well. This allows the game to highlight the two creative ideas it had going for it, the detective aspect of the game and its well-designed open world Gotham City. This gets rid of the overly complicated game design choice of having to constantly switch between detective mode and combat mode throughout the entire game. Finally, this removes the game's terrible idea of giving the players very little direction regarding what they should be doing in this game. That, to me, would have been a much better experience and made Batman and Robin a shockingly good game that may have aged better than people thought. That isn't what we got with this game though. What we actually got was a miserable experience of a video game. I understand not wanting to hold the player's hand and not wanting to tell player details like, go to that building to get the next major clue, or go to this building because that's where Freeze's henchmen will be. For you to beat them up and get an item, you'll need to defeat Mr. Freeze, since it may potentially remove the wonder that this open world Gotham gives the player. However, that creative idea is a double-edged sword. When the idea of giving the player an aimless experience works, it feels magical and so incredibly rewarding because it creates a thoroughly memorable experience that may never be replicated for that player again after a first playthrough. When it doesn't work though, like in this very case, the lack of any sense of direction in Batman and Robin creates a frustrating and very boring gameplay loop of hitting the streets of Gotham, destroying enemies and cars, hoping you picked up enough clues to see where Freeze or Freeze's henchmen are, so maybe you'll be lucky enough to get another major clue to progress Batman and Robin's paper-thin story, and then driving all the way back to the Batcave to get health back and to see what new clues you got. If everything I just said didn't already emphasize how bad this game is, here's an even more annoying fun fact. The game is so hellbent on wanting the player to aimlessly and repetitively explore Gotham that if you even think of using the optional shortcut that takes you back to the Batcave, the game will give you a 5-minute penalty for using that shortcut. This same shortcut, by the way, is available right there on the start menu. What is the point of it being there if it's not there for a good reason, or if it's not designed to make the player's life easier? Why include a feature that's only going to backfire on the player? Why bother including this feature if you're going to actively harm the player for using it? Why bother making Wayne Manor so far away from Gotham that it requires having an emergency teleport button in case the player can't find extra health to continue living after being bombarded with freeze rays and rockets as you drive in Gotham? What is the point? It makes no sense. Batman and Robin as a PS1 game is an absolute disaster. From top to bottom, this game is simply not good at all. While it takes a bunch of brave creative risks that can be appreciated, none of those paid off all these years later. The character designs look horrendous, the controls are awful, the camera is struggling to keep up with the game's clunky controls as much as I struggle to keep up with the clunky controls, and the heavy focus on making this game an aimless detective game is an absolute failure. I might sound wild, but with the number of scenes featuring Batman, Robin, or Batgirl riding motorcycles or the Batmobile in the movie, this Batman and Robin game should have probably capitalized on that more than anything else, since it would have been a better experience. I genuinely would have preferred using this game's driving system to drive through a bunch of levels inspired by Joel Schumacher's set pieces as we chase down Mr. Freeze and Poison Ivy, with some combat missions sprinkled in between the driving missions, than what this tie-in game ended up being. Batman and Robin is probably going to join a massive pile of other games that I'll play and make videos about, where everybody's gonna say the same exact thing. I played this game as a kid, I dropped it immediately. Or I rented this game and returned it back the same day because of how bad it is. And you know what? It wouldn't shock me. As a fan of the Joel Schumacher film, this tie-in game let me down despite my rock bottom expectations. And although it genuinely hurts me to say this, I have to say it. This Batman and Robin game is one of the worst superhero games ever made.